Welcome, everyone. This is Jim Boy Star. It's the Jim Boy Star podcast. And what a special edition of the show I have today. It's called I Am a Dragon Warrior. And here with Pete, a.k.a. Kenshin1913 on YouTube. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And yourself?
Good. Excited to talk about Dragon Warrior, although some people probably more know this series now as Dragon Quest.
Right.
Do you, and let's give some background on you first, as far as one reason that Pete is on this show is his Let's Plays, as again, Kenshin1913. I think you've done every Dragon Warrior / Quest, if I'm not mistaken.
Pretty much. Yeah, everything up to 10, because that one hasn't come out in North America yet, but I think they have plans for it to come out. So as soon as it comes out, I'll probably be doing a Let's Play of that as well.
Now, one thing I do want to mention here is not only has he done each Dragon Warrior / Dragon Quest, but in some cases, you've actually done different versions of different games, of the same game.
Yeah, that's correct. I pretty much try to do if they have an extreme difference between each game, or like between like Dragon Warrior versus like Dragon Quest, I will play it to show off the different things about it. But yeah, there's multiple versions of a lot of the Dragon Warrior games, and I do like to try and play them all because I'm a huge fan.
Now, in this particular episode, we're going to just focus, for the most part, on Dragon Warrior / Quest 1. But I'm sure there's going to be references to non-storyline version references to future games, because I want to spend this show talking about the aspects, because let's face it, Kenshin, Pete, all of the things that you've been doing on your YouTube page, everything is based on something, and it all started with 1. And that's why I want to take the time specifically to talk about 1.
Yes, it did, yeah.
Now, why don't you start us off here, and let's talk about, first off, the origin, I guess you would say, not so much the story, but basically explain to someone that asks you, what is Dragon Warrior? What would you say to them?
Well, I would tell them that it's a role-playing video game series, right? And it's a what they call a JRPG, which is a Japanese role-playing game, and it originally started on the Nintendo back in I think it was '86, and pretty much it was one of the very first role-playing games where it kind of took like people who used to play like on the board games and tabletop role-playing games, and pretty much made it into a single player experience on this huge world. And well, at least it was huge back in the day. And it was made by pretty much 3 people. The designer was Yuji Horii. The character creator, like the guy who drew all the art for everything, was Akira Toriyama, who is also the guy who made Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z and stuff like that. That's why a lot of the artwork throughout the series looks very similar. And then there's Koichi Sugiyama, who did all the music. And these 3 guys pretty much, along with some other people, ended up making the very first Dragon Warrior, which was really an amazing game at the time.
Now, I guess before we go any further, what got you into this particular game? Certainly, I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think the Let's Play that you did was your first time experiencing the game.
No, it wasn't. Pretty much the when I first got Dragon Warrior was back when I was a kid, and this was around the time, I don't know if you remember, Nintendo Power came out, and
Sure.
it was giving away copies of Dragon Warrior. And
Oh, I
so
remember
apparently
that.
my mom ended up purchasing one, and that was actually the first role-playing game that I've ever played. Like, we had what you would consider a big screen TV back then. It was probably like 20 inches or
Right.
whatever, and we hooked it up to the Nintendo, we hooked the Nintendo up to it, and we played it. And it was a fun family experience that me and also my brother enjoyed quite a bit. And it was cool because you could name your hero, and you felt like, hey, that's me. and we're going out through this world, and it was just, like, I don't remember what year it was. It must have been 86 or 87, and
Mm.
we got Dragon Warrior, and what was it? It was pretty much the first role playing game that I ever played, and that's what kind of got me into it. And then when you found out that there were other games years later, you're like, oh my God, yeah, I got to pick that one up too. And then they've expanded and added new features to pretty much every game to make it more different or different than each experience.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm on your boat. This was probably the first role playing game I've played, and have been an RPG fan since. To be honest with you, that's
Hmm.
probably my genre of preference when it comes to video games. But the thing that made Dragon Warrior slash Quest interesting as years gone has gone by is, well, firstly, the name change. I personally don't know when that happened, but do you have any idea when it started going the way of Dragon Quest?
I think the thing was that I want to say that there was a actual board game that was called Dragon Quest back in the day, like a tabletop Dungeons and Dragons kind of game. It was
Mm-hmm.
called Dragon Quest. In America, it had like a copyright and everything, or trademark or
Sure.
whatever. And so what ended up happening was, I believe that they had to get a new name, so they just kind of used Dragon Warrior, and that worked for the first four games, and even some of the Dragon Warrior monster games. But then when Dragon Quest, oh, even Dragon Quest Seven was Dragon Warrior. But after that, they pretty much went back to. They ended up getting the rights back to Dragon Quest because they didn't make the board game anymore.
Okay.
So it's been there since the beginning in America, and then in Dragon Quest Eight was the first time that they were able to bring a game out in America with with the Dragon Quest name. But before that, it was always known as Dragon Warrior, at least to the North Americans.
Right. And I just came up with a theory just now based on what you were saying because one thing, and I, again, I'm in your boat here when it comes to, I played one, I did two, three, four, which is probably my favorite.
Hmm.
Then see folks, one thing you have to understand is me and Pete love the Dragon Warrior series, but mostly it is Japan that loved it more.
Even
And
more. Yeah.
but the
I
thing,
believe when Dragon Quest 3 came out of work, I mean came out of work. When Dragon Quest 3 came out in Japan, there were so many people that took the day off to get the game in Japan that they pretty much told the company Enix, which was the guys who made Dragon Warrior slash Quest at the time,
mm,
they pretty much told them you can't release a game during the work week. You have to release it on the weekend. So
wow.
that's what they ended up having to do because it was so popular back in Japan that people, like I said, would take a day off from work to get it, or they would either skip school or skip work or whatever and just play it. It's kind of funny that like just recently with the Fallout 4 game, there was a lot of people in America doing that too. I knew a bunch of people who were just taking the day off just to play that
Mm.
game. So it's pretty impactful. You know what I mean?
Yo, no, I'm not gonna lie. I think I mean, this is a long time ago, but I think when Kingdom Hearts 2 came out, I'm pretty sure I took the day off of work. I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
almost guarantee you. So it happens, but what I'm getting at is largely popular in Japan, but not as much in North America compared to Japan because, from what I can recall, 5 and 6 were not really released in North America.
No, no, they weren't.
Because I
They
remember
were.
thinking the series was over as a kid. I'm like thinking, oh, the series is over. That sucks. It
Hmm.
wasn't until when I started getting back into video games that I got a PlayStation 2, and I was like, wait, there's a Dragon Warrior 7? And that's my theory, is that the reason why 7 was called Dragon Warrior is because they figured that the North Americans would remember Dragon Warrior because the last one that came out was 4.
Yeah, that's probably it. I mean, and then they eventually gained the rights back to Dragon Quest, so they're like, let's just make it all Dragon Quest. But yeah, about like Dragon Warrior 5 or Dragon Quest 5 and 6, they were scheduled to come out for the Super Nintendo back in the day, but then the company Enix, who makes the games, they ended up pretty much just leaving their North American like headquarters, and then just
That might have been
becoming
it.
kind of
Yeah.
like a Japan only based game for, or game maker for a while. So we didn't end up seeing anything from them for quite some time.
Like I said, as a kid, when you're not, and also this was more of a time. You have to remember, this is more of a time when we didn't have instant gratification. There was no Twitter.
Yeah.
There wasn't as many websites out there. So as a kid, you just think, oh, the series is dead.
Yeah,
Like there's no way to
when
know.
it's kind of like the same thing when like you were saying, like when I finally saw, like when I had a PS1 and Dragon Warrior 7 came out, I was like, holy crap, Dragon Warrior 7. Then I was thinking to myself, where's 5 and 6? And like you were saying, back in the day, you wouldn't know because there was no internet to go and like Google it and say, all right, where's Dragon Warrior 5 and 6? And it almost shares a similar like parallel also to like the Final Fantasy series, in the fact that, like, it was Final Fantasy 1, and then 2 was for the Super Nintendo, but that was really 4 in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And then you find out about that and you're like, what? And then Final Fantasy 7 comes out on the PlayStation 1, and you're like, where's the other Final Fantasy
Yeah.
games? You know what I mean? Where
And
they all go?
and also, let's say you were able to find out that, let's say you were more ahead of the curve and you were able to find out that 5 and 6 were released in Japan. Okay, get so what's your plan now? You
Exactly.
didn't really. It wasn't easy like it is now to get something from another country like that.
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah, you would
Um,
need to buy a Super Famicom, which is pretty much the Japanese version of the Super Nintendo. Then you'd have to buy the game. Then you'd have to be able to understand Japanese. Yeah,
right.
it's a
Sure.
huge. It could be a huge. Well, not only on your money, but huge on your time as well, just to try and figure out what was going on.
Although to be fair, I'm not going to discredit people because I'm sure there were people that did that. Now,
Oh
whether or
yeah.
not it was perfect, their Japanese to to English was perfect. That's another story.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's go into one here. How
Mm-hmm.
many versions are you aware of one? There's obviously the one that was originally released, and I remember you doing a let's play on. Do I want to say it's a Game Boy?
I
Maybe
think it
not.
was the Super Nintendo
Is it
version that they
okay?
made, which was also on the Game Boy Color as well.
So, how many versions of this game do you recall doing?
All right, I have done at least two. I'm planning on doing another version in January. I'm gonna kind of go back to my Dragon Warrior roots, but yeah, there's at least eight, maybe eight different versions of the first game. You have it for the Nintendo. You have a remake for the Super Nintendo that's included with Dragon Warrior 2. You also have, let's see, the Game Boy Color one. You have one that was on the mobile. You have one like literally that's on the mobile now, like back in the day, like when mobile first started.
Hmm.
Then you have there's this one called Dragon Warrior Kenshin, which is like a system where you plug it into your TV with the three RCA cables, and you
Okay.
pretty much play Dragon Warrior 1, but in a first person mode.
Oh,
And
that's weird.
you have, yeah, you have a sword and a shield, and you kind of fight with that. It's kind of like Dragon Quest Swords, if anyone's ever played that.
Yeah, that's
It's
the
like the
Wii one,
it's
right?
like the
That's
origin to that. And then I think there's at least eight that I can think of. There's a lot of remakes. And you know what the great thing about it is? It's like I love the fact that they do a remake, because the first Dragon Warrior game is like a perfect game to get people in. Like if people are on the border about like, oh, do I kind of like the idea of role playing games, and I like to try something out. Like, what would you suggest? I would point to Dragon Warrior 1 all the time, especially the newer versions, because they're a little more user friendly.
okay.
But yeah, I think Dragon Warrior, the first game, is definitely like a perfect role playing game to get people into playing games, because it's a fun game. It's got a good story for the one of the first games that do like that kind of thing.
Hmm.
and it's pretty easy.
Let me ask you this, because I have to know this, because I know you do the Let's Plays and whatnot. Is it tougher to get like a game like, say, Dragon Warrior, or Dragon Warrior 1, if there's so many different versions, and then you're like doing like a version of it, but it's your fourth version of it? Like, is it harder to squeeze content out of that?
Sometimes it can be, but I like to change it up a little bit. Like maybe when I like to show like the differences between the games as well, and just like I guess it is a little bit, but it's not too hard because I always try to change it up and do something a little different every time I play. Like the very first time I ever played Dragon Warrior and I played the game, my curiosity got the best of me. Like at the very end of the game, there's a sword that you get called Edric's sword, which is the best weapon in the game, and that's the only weapon that you can use to defeat the Dragon Lord. Right? He's the main boss of the game. So what ended up happening to me was with the curiosity, like I said, got the best of me, and I sold off the sword, and I had to use the flame sword to fight him, and I couldn't do it, and I had to use, I think it was Blazemore or whatever. Anyways, I ended up doing that. That was the very first time I played it. So I'm like, there's got to be a better way to do this. So I played it again. I had the regular Edric sword, and I used that to defeat him. And I'm like, wow, that is so much easier. And I talk about that a lot on my LPs when I'm doing that game the first time. So I was actually thinking about trying that out in this next playthrough that I'm going to do of it, just to kind of show, to see if it can be done.
All right.
Or like one thing I like to try to do is like do like a low level run and try not to get too high levels.
Okay.
Before, to see if I can challenge myself as a quote unquote expert of the game to be able to beat it in a certain fashion, or even try to figure out different strategies to use on different monsters. It's always kind of interesting to try and do that. Like a lot of the times I don't use the sleep spell in the game because I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to attack them. Don't bother about putting them to sleep. Let's just get rid of them as fast as you can. But maybe this time around I'll use the sleep spell a little more, or stop spell or something like that, So I always try to do like different strategies and things.
Sure, absolutely. Now, one other thing before we get into the meat of this is I do want to discuss now, this is something that I did not know until I was much older. So apparently Dragon Warrior 1 is part of a trilogy, basically. The same way that 4, 5, and 6 are also in the same kind of world or whatnot.
Yep.
Can you explain some of that without being too spoilery? Because certainly, or I don't know, because it might be a little bit tough. See what you could do.
Well, you're talking about the first 3 games,
right? The first 3 games are used, so it's in the same.
Yes, it's in the same world. So Dragon Warrior 1 is the first game that you play, usually, right?
Yeah.
And then the next one pretty much takes place. So what in the first game, you're basically a descendant of this guy whose name is Edric, or Loto, if you're playing the Japanese version. And pretty much you're like the guy who's going to save the kingdom because the bad guy took the princess, and you got to get her back, and you got to save the world from the bad guy. So then the next game takes place, I believe, 100 years later, where you're playing the descendants of the guy that you were just in the first game. Okay. And again, you have to go collect things and fight the bad guy to save the world. Now, the third game is a little different, where you get to play as a hero who gets to pick his party with different various classes depending on what you want to do. And you got to fight the bad guy and save the world. But about 2/3 of the way through the game, there's a big twist that connects the 3 games together. And then kind of like at the end of the game, you kind of figure out who you are in the timeline of the first 3 Dragon Warriors. Yep. That's kind of as good as I can get without spoiling too much.
Absolutely. As a kid, did you know that the first 3 were connected? Because I sure as hell didn't.
I didn't think the third one was, but I figured the first 2 were, and then I didn't think that they were doing like a trilogy thing. And then at the end of the game of the third one, I'm like, oh my god, wow, that's so awesome.
And then
that's cool.
And then of course my mind was even more blown when I actually played Dragon Quest V and Dragon Quest VI, since again those were the two that were not really offered in North America at the time. So that was something as well. All right, let's get to this. So let's discuss the characters. I guess your main one is your hero. I would consider the king pretty main, right?
Yeah, I would consider him a character for sure. He's the guy who saves your game. So yeah, he's definitely very important.
We have, let's see, who else? We have the princess, who in my opinion is very, very needy.
Very needy, oh yeah.
And then of course we have the Dragon Lord. That's what he is, and I don't want to mix up like what I'm saying for also future stuff, but he's always been the Dragon Lord, right?
Yes, he has.
Only I think at some points
pretty
he does
much
get
I guess he's I think he really is a dragon, and then he just takes the form of a dude. Because I was always confused on that too. Like when I first played it, like I was like, oh, I wonder if is he really a guy, or did he just turn into a dragon? But I think he's a dragon that turned into a guy.
Because his sprite kind of makes him look more human as well.
Oh yeah,
that's used in the game. Who you're like I said, I'm looking for you at a lot of this, but outside of those characters, would you consider any other characters as main characters?
Probably. Those three are definitely the main characters that you can kind of interact with.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a couple of characters pretty much that are not there or not around that are kind of important, like the guy Edric, who pretty much is your ancestor or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
He's pretty much the hero who saved the world a long time ago, and you're his descendant, and so it's your job to save the world. Then there's also, I think there's only like two other people that I can think of. One of them is Garnon. He's like a bard, and he used to have like a harp that you need to do like an item quest thing. And then finally the last guy, which I don't even think he had a name now that I'm thinking about, is the guy who owned the shop where you can get Edric's armor. I think he was the only other guy, but even then I don't even think he's that important either. So pretty much just Edric, really, if you think about it. He's the only other guy that you probably kind of need to know about a little bit.
So one thing that strikes me right when you start to play it, you see the way the game is designed, and a lot of things kind of give the inspiration to like other RPGs. Like you have the stairs that you go down, which to be fair, I did not like how. And I think this is only done for Dragon Warrior 1, but you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is where you actually have to stand on the stairs and then actually select stairs.
Yeah, I think that was the only game that they did it in.
Thank God they smartened up to that. Again.
Oh yeah, that and the when you went to a treasure chest, you could look at it you can open it, but you can't. You had to like literally use the take command to take whatever was in the treasure. And that was a real pain. I'm glad they fixed that as well.
It's interesting because that's when I that's one thing that I definitely wanted to notice more from this particular like research is what kind of stuff did you like. This is the standard for one, and again, everything has to start somewhere. And it's interesting to see what they decide to keep for future games and what they didn't, as far as mechanics wise. I'm pretty sure they kept the end song through almost every game, if not every game, when you stay at the inn.
Yeah,
is that right? That was the same. Okay,
it's pretty much the same music. Also, let's see what else. Saving the game, I don't remember if that's the same song, but I know like when you gain a party member, I know this is a different game, but when you gain a party member, you pretty much have the same song during that throughout the entire series as well. But it is pretty interesting to see where the whole series kind of takes its roots from. You know what I mean?
The origins,
and obviously they fix some stuff in order to make it a little more user friendly. And
they've gotten more creative as far as well, when you go out, you have spells,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that the name of one of the spells was very, very unoriginal. Nowadays, you get like Blaze Most, Inferno,
Mm-hmm.
all these. Back then, you got Hurt
Yeah,
and
hurt.
Hurt
Hurt, which
More.
was like, what is that?
What
Hurt.
is
What
Hurt?
is it? A fire spell? What the hell is it? Is it ice? Is it lightning? Hurt. Just hurt.
Yeah, and then your upgrade from that, Hurt More.
Yeah.
Like I said, you nowadays you get all these, sometimes badass names that
Mm-hmm.
like that's really, really cool. But it all started with Hurt, and
Mm-hmm.
also I think this is the only one that they had this in. And again, you're going to correct me if I'm wrong here. When you go into a cave or a dungeon, whatever it is, there's a spell called Radiant. And then without Radiant, like where it basically all it does is it gives you what should be the normal amount of light to the screen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was kind of an interesting game mechanic back in the day. But yeah, I'm glad they kind of got rid of that too, because that would just be very annoying. But yeah, and then you had to use, like, if you didn't have the spell, you had to use a torch. Which, you know what? In the back then, you think about it, you're like, okay, this is logical. But then as you're playing a game, as you get older and you play games, you're like, you want things to be a little more convenient. But yeah, Radiant, I think that was the only game that they might have had that in. But it's not the only time that they had torches to light up areas, because you
Right.
needed a couple of different torches throughout the series in order to see through the dark and whatnot.
But see, I think what annoys me about the a Radiant as opposed to a torch was like Radiant, if I'm not mistaken, could actually, you had to use your magic or whatever. I guess it's called magic power still at that
Mm-hmm.
time. Yeah. Whereas, okay, fine. If I need a torch, I can buy it, and you know what? If I don't need it, I can sell it. But you know, if like I guess I feel like the torch was a better way to go than Radiant to me.
Yeah. Granted, it would be a smaller like field of view, but I guess it would be if you were trying to conserve MP a lot, because I think it costs 8, so
It was a lot, yeah.
that could be a lot for, and especially if you're in a big area, you might have to cast it maybe twice, even 3 times. That's like 24 MP right there.
Hmm.
That could be a lot, but with the torch, you have it throughout the whole dungeon, so that's kind of good too.
Yeah. And then we're going to talk here about the battle system where it's random encounters.
Mm.
This was certainly new at the time for me, that I can just walk around and then all of a sudden run into someone or something.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed on your playthrough, and I would like to hope that this is like on any playthrough this happens, but I guess I can't guarantee that. I think the first enemy that you meet is a slime,
Usually, yes.
which I think is the most appropriate thing, since they're probably one of the more iconic things with this series as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Even on that what is it, the oh god, what's the name of it? It's the board game Fortune Street.
Yes.
That has Dragon Quest characters and Mario characters. The slime is very, very, I guess you would say
Prominent in
prominent. Yes, thank you. That was the word. And I just think it was very appropriate that everyone's first fight should be the slime.
there. Oh yeah, I think so too.
Um,
Because it's just like a little harmless guy that you're like, oh yeah, this guy's gonna be easy, even if you don't have a weapon in that game. And it's kind of interesting. A lot of the first that game like Dragon Warrior kind of brought to video games. You know what I mean? Like like that was one of the first games, if you think about it, where like you could actually see you can sort of see the equipment that you had on your character, in the essence of, hey, I bought a weapon. Hey, look at that. I've got a weapon in my hand. Like in the beginning of the game, you start off with no armor, no shield, no sword or whatever, and when you go to the weapons store or the armor, you can actually buy a shield, and it'll actually show you a shield, and then you can buy the sword or whatever, and it actually shows it to you. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, no,
And
definitely.
it was one of the first games that I remember that had random encounters. Like I know, just to kind of do like a parallel, Final Fantasy One had random encounters as well. But the thing with theirs is they had a lot of fixed encounters where you would step on one square and then you would automatically go into a fight. And that could be
Mm.
a little annoying too if you want to explore a certain area or whatever. But this game kind of even in the aspect of like the amount of fights that you get between walking, they did a really good job of keeping a good balance of being able to explore and fight, which was really cool.
Yeah, and actually, Warrior, not Dragon Warrior One, not necessarily immune from what you just mentioned with Final Fantasy, which is what I want to bring up next, which I don't believe happens again. But and I can't think of the enemy. There's two. One I think is a golem or something like that, right
Mm-hmm.
outside of town. Now,
Yeah.
if you're just walking, you see nothing there. Like you're very unprepared. Like as you're just walking around and it's not as if this golem is some regular monster that maybe you have to use a few medical herbs on.
Mm-hmm.
This is like an actual boss, and I don't think they've done that to future Dragon Warrior / Quest games. I think a dragon that guards the princess is another situation where you don't see anyone, and then all of a sudden, but if you step on that one square, that'll trigger this boss fight that you did not know was going to be happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they did that with yeah, the dragon, the golem, and also the guy, the axe knight to get Edric's armor. That's also another fixed encounter. I think in the other remakes of the game, they actually showed the dragon and the golem. I don't know about the axe guy, but those were probably the only three like forced encounters throughout the whole game.
Now, was this the end of forced encounters though from the series? Because off the top of my head, I can't think of any, but I don't really remember Dragon Warrior 2 or 3 that well, and I would think if it were to happen again, it would have been on those two.
Yeah, I don't think there were any extra forced encounters in those two games that I can think of off the top of my head. I know that they ended up having a couple of encounters where you had to like talk to the monsters before you had to fight them.
Okay.
But I don't think there were any like fixed encounters. And most of the time, you kind of had an idea that something was coming a little bit because it would be in a dungeon or whatnot. I don't think they'd ever have like a fight in the town. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
in an area where it would be weird to have it in.
I guess being a gamer that I am now, I just look and I'm like, you know what? I want to see something there that represents what I'm about to do. And if
Hmm.
I know if I talk to this person, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to get into a fight, so let me at least heal up.
Yeah.
Whereas, so like, I'm really glad that they did away with that. Are there any other like mechanics or anything that you'd like to bring up that maybe I had missed before we go on to the story and all of that?
I kind of like the fact that they sort of got rid of the barrier thing. You remember the barriers that they used to have, like the electric. I used to think of
Okay,
them
yeah,
as
yeah,
like
yeah.
electric floors.
Oh
They kind of
yeah.
slowly, they kind of slowly got rid of them.
I
I mean, they
mean,
still have swamps, or like if you walk in a swamp, you take a
yeah.
little bit of HP off,
Mhm.
but it's not nearly as bad as barriers. Wow, those were nasty back in the day when I originally played it, and I saw the what is it? The one of the guards in the castle, and he's behind a barrier. I'm like, oh, let me go talk to him.
Right,
Take two
right.
steps, I'm dead. And I'm like, oh
And it makes me wonder,
no.
wow, how tough was that guy to get over there?
Yeah. Well, how did he get over there? That was
Right.
something I always used to ask. How did he get over there?
Or he got there and he got stuck
Another
there.
mechanic, which they've kind of simplified it better, is the door command. Along with like when you get a key, you
Okay.
know, you have to have so many keys or whatever. In newer versions of the game, all you have to do is have the key, and then you'll automatically open the door. You don't have to, or use whatever the open command or whatever. But
That's true.
back then, you had to make sure you had to buy keys, which was an interesting thing you had to do, and then you had to actually use a command called door, or you could use the item, I think. and you would open the door. But that's another one where they kind of like, you understand where it's going. You understand where, how what's going on with it. But it's like this could be a little simpler, which they did eventually fix I think in 3, or even 4. 4 did a terrific job with the doors in that game.
4 is, like I said, 4 is amazing, and one day I might even just do a special on 4 at some point. I'm not gonna lie, but and going back to the barrier, the barrier floor things, I don't think that they were even used past 4. I think 4 was the last I can recall seeing them. So it's very interesting to me to see the origins and then where they would wind up. Although I guess some might argue 9 almost ridiculously too different, in my opinion, than where they started from. But I still have hope for 10.
Yeah, I think 10 is, from what I've heard, it's a MMO. It's a multiplayer online game.
All right.
But I heard the main story is actually pretty good. So hopefully whenever we get that, because they did announce Dragon Quest 11, which would be pretty much for a couple of different systems or whatever. But to get back to Dragon Warrior 1, one other thing that was kind of interesting about the game, which I loved when I was a little kid because I used to like King Arthur and knights and everything. That is the only game that they did in like Old English as well, which was kind of cool. Where they'd be like, thou art slain, or you have taken away, a slime appears, or something like that. Right. Where they had like Old English, and it was kind of cool.
Yeah,
they didn't really do that in any of the other games. They just kind of like said, let's just make it clear and stuff. But I always found that cool because I love knights and stuff, and I figured that's how they talked. So it really like made me like the game even more back in the day.
Well, I mean, they got rid of that until the remakes of certain games, and then you just had the ridiculously heavy accents.
Oh yeah, and
Jesus Christ.
That stuff. To be honest, the accents are pretty cool when you can hear them.
Yes.
But then when you have to read them, it's like, what the hell are you saying? What's going on?
I'm like, thank God I played Dragon Warrior 4 before, because, God, I don't know how I'd be able to get through all this reading. All right, I'm going to rely on you for this next section. We're going to talk about the story here, mostly because you probably had to live it a bunch of times when you're doing your Let's Plays. So why don't you just give us like a brief synopsis? Well, not even a brief. The game itself, how long would you say it is? If you were to start the game right now, someone starts the game right now, how many hours do you think it is?
I would say maybe 10 hours, depending on how hardcore you're going to get with it.
That's even harder than I thought. Okay.
Really?
I don't know. Because I'm thinking Nintendo games didn't have much room on it in regards to space. Unless you're really talking, unless like a majority of your time is on grinding, which it could be for certain. Like I think the dragon, if I recall, was a grinding kind of boss, the one that guarded the princess. So I mean, if you take out that and say that you just have the best weapons, and if you go through the actual story, I think I would say more like 6 or 7.
Okay, yeah, I could see about 7. Well, it depends on how if you're just having someone who's playing it like who's never played before, they'd probably take a little longer than like
they
me or you. You know what I mean?
Right. Dragon Warrior 4, I'll breeze right through. Yeah. I remember I played it on when it was released on the 3DS at one point, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe how much I remember. Like I was steadily going through it. Dragon Warrior 1.
Yeah, you would be surprised on how much you would remember from when you play a game. You're like, oh yeah, I remember this part. Yeah, that's cool.
So, but for Dragon Warrior 1, I think it would probably, you're right. For someone like me or you, maybe about 6 to 7. So it's not that long of a story. So why don't you give it to us? This is your time now. Just give us the story. You experience it when you do the Let's Plays. Give us all the way up until right before the ending and your final battle, because I do want to use that as a separate section for one reason.
Yeah. So pretty much you are the descendant of a hero named Edric or Loto, and you've been charged by King Lork to pretty much rescue the princess who was taken by this evil guy named the Dragon Lord. And now what he also took was this thing called the Ball of Light, which will pretty much wipe out the monsters if it's in the right hands. So what you have to do is you have to leave the castle, gain levels, gain abilities, and pretty much defeat the Dragon Lord. But along the way, you kind of gotta learn a little bit of your past and the essence of. You gotta go read the tablet of Edric, and then you have to go. You have to do like an item swap thing where you have to get a fairy flute and a harp, and it's pretty funny that your character is pretty good at playing musical instruments as well.
Yeah.
And so you get that stuff. You got to make to get over to the Dragon Lord's castle. You need to collect all of Edric's gear. So you have to get his sword. You have to get his armor, and he doesn't really have a shield, which is kind of odd. But so what you have to do is collect these two items to make is the sunstones and the rainbow and the rain staff, and you put them together and you make rainbow drops.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to prove that you were a descendant of Edric. So and then also you have to fight a golem, and then eventually about halfway through your journey, you will save the princess, and then she's gonna nag you a lot.
No, wait. Let's stop there for a second, real quick.
Yeah.
I want to know. Does it get explained like why this princess was captured, or?
Pretty much. I guess the Dragon Lord kind of came like I don't know if it's a couple years before, or like a couple months before, but sometime before, and pretty much just captured her because he went to go attack the castle. He took the Ball of Light, and then he took the princess along with him and stuck her in a cave.
All right, and then also, so you bring her back to the castle, like you, as the hero, literally bring her back step by step to the castle, if I recall.
Yep, you just carry her.
And by the way, you can't. She asks if she can go with you at some point where when you save her, and if you say no, guess what? You're going to be in a never-ending loop.
Oh yeah, but thou must.
Yeah.
That's actually something that came about from the Dragon Warrior series. Is a "but thou must" moment. A lot of people use that expression nowadays.
Can you explain to people for that don't know?
Yeah. Where you have to say one answer in order to progress the story.
Right. So in this case, she has to go with you. If you say no, she says, "But thou must," and then you're asked again. And then if you say no again, she says, "But thou must," and it keeps going and going. It'll never stop. You just have to say yes or reset your game and come to terms that you will not complete Dragon Warrior 1. Yeah. So she gets back to the castle. Let's pick the story up from there. Go ahead. She's back.
So after you bring her back to the castle, you pretty much have to make the rainbow drops, and then that makes a rainbow bridge over to the Dragon Lord, where he lives on an island in a castle. And when you're in there, you collect the final weapon, which is Edric's sword, and then you go off to fight the Dragon Lord.
All right, and then so here's our final battle. Now, the ending. If people are listening to this, and they should already know that this is a discussion of Dragon Warrior 1. We're going to spoil the whole story anyway. You should know that going into this recording. The ending here, now there are two options, which I didn't remember until I researched this again, where the Dragon Lord asks the hero, "Do you want to join him?" instead of fighting him.
Right.
Now, what happens if you say yes?
If you say yeah to
joining him
to the Dragon Lord, they'll actually be like, "Okay, yeah, you can join me," and then your game freezes pretty much, and you're done. And it gives you I think it's like a red screen.
Yeah.
Like whatever you're looking at, and then the background turns red. So I kind of always thought of that like, "Oh man, he killed me. He must have killed me then." And so they wouldn't let you reset. They wouldn't let you just hit start or whatever and try to go back. So you pretty much have to reset your game. So you got screwed, and you'd have to do the castle all over again. But if you said no, obviously you would fight him.
Now, I also read... Wait, hold on one second. I don't know if you heard this, because I had read this in preparation for this show, and I wouldn't remember this because I was still a kid and you were as well. If you were to say yes, I also had read that in some cases your game file, your save file, would be deleted as well.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Well, I mean, now I'm asking if you heard anything about that, because if it even happened, I wouldn't remember, because I don't remember, all the way back then. I'm sure you don't either.
No.
But if it was true,
I don't think so.
All right, no proof of that, but if it was true, that is super messed up.
Yeah, that is pretty messed up. Unless you save multiple copy or multiple versions of your one game, then yeah, that's pretty messed up.
All right, so now if you say no, you get into the fight, you win, obviously. And what happens to... Does he just die? What happens?
So after you defeat the Dragon Lord, pretty much he was holding on to that ball of light. You pick it up. The light shines out throughout the world, which, if I haven't mentioned yet, the world's name is Alfgard. So light shines out through the whole world. And then you go back. You pretty much go through what I call a typical Dragon Warrior ending, which is very cool, and it's probably one of the only games series that I know that's kind of like an open world ending, where it just doesn't go right to the ending. You actually get the opportunity to explore the world, or at least check out a couple of towns and see what the townspeople have to say about like what's been going on in the world after you beat the boss, which is pretty cool. I kind of like the fact that you can do that, and then eventually your main goal is to go back to the king, and then the king is all happy that you defeated the Dragon Lord, and then the princess. Now this is something that I didn't know either, because I always thought that you had to rescue the princess, but apparently there is a second ending to the game. If you never save the princess, there would be I think she wouldn't be there, and you would go off on your own. But if the princess is there, she has to go with you.
That's so weird. So it's like an optional quest, saving the princess?
I think so. I don't think you have to do that.
So weird.
Yeah, it's weird, because you'd figure that would be something that you have to do in order to beat the game. But if you've never played it before, you should save her, because she gives you an item that helps you collect something later that you kind of need. But like for me and you, we probably kind of know where that item is already.
Oh yeah. Was that like the 7 steps out, 13?
Yes.
Whatever. Yes. I don't remember what it is, but exactly.
Yeah.
But,
that thing was a pain.
And then you're like, oh please.
You get the princess. You and her go off because the king pretty much says, hey, you did such a good job. You be the new king, and you're like, sure. No, I want to go do my own thing.
Understandable. Yeah. And then, but then what does the princess do? Which I don't understand.
She wants to come with you, and you gotta be like, nah. And then she's like, but thou must.
Here's my problem with that. So who's gonna rule the kingdom after this king dies?
Exactly. It's not like he has any other heirs at this moment.
We forgot the most needy line of the princess in the entire game. We completely glossed over it.
What was that?
Where after you return her, and you talk to her and you get that item. What is the item called again? Like
I think it's called Laura's Love, or
yeah. But when she asks, does thou love me? And you're like, no, but thou must. I'm like, what? You just met him not even 10 minutes ago.
Exactly.
So
I love at first sight, I guess.
For her,
yeah.
So one other thing I meant to, I can't believe I skipped over this thing that I kind of appreciate more about the games like Dragon Warrior, that I appreciate more at an older age than I did then, is the NPCs. The like your soldier that's kind of just walking around the place, your person staying at the inn, because it's so weird to me that, think about it in real life, and you just go say hi to someone, and then they're like, give you this weird dialogue.
Yeah. I
can't think of a good example off the top of my head, but some of the stuff is just weird, and I love the fact that there's probably a group of people that sit at a table and think of these things, because they don't get in there by magic. Someone has to approve everything that's said in the game.
Right. Well, luckily those guys are. I mean, they're there because that's one thing that's cool about role-playing games, I guess, is like they want you to explore, and obviously if there's people there, probably talk to them, because if they just told you nonsense, which some of them did.
Some of them do, yeah.
Like there was one guy, he said something about like Nestor.
Okay.
I forget exactly what he said. Something about Nestor, and actually Nestor was like the because like I was saying earlier, Nintendo Power and Dragon Warrior Enix, they kind of hooked up.
Mm.
So Nestor, he was kind of like the mascot of Nintendo Power at the time. So they were like, "Oh, has thou seen Nestor or whatever? I can't find him." And I was like, "What the hell?" And then eventually, when I got my Nintendo Power, I was like, "Oh, is he talking about that guy?" And so, with that's kind of like dumb, but thank God that some of the NPCs were there, because if they weren't, you would probably get even more lost. Like
that's true. Some of them are helpful.
The thing about them is that they'll give you clues and stuff about what to do, but it's just funny that how they know what to do.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Right. And who are you talking to? And like I said, I just love again, this is one of these things I've grown to appreciate as I got older, that there's just that everything, even someone that's like, if you see a little boy and they're like, "I'm looking for my dog," someone approved that. Mm-hmm. That dialogue was there. I don't know. Maybe that's just me that's very amused by that and has a bigger appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're almost going to wrap this thing up here, but I do want to talk about the legacy. So as I mentioned, this is Dragon Warrior 1. The future was based on this. What do you feel were some of Dragon Warrior 1's biggest contributions to the rest of the series?
Well, I think one of the biggest contributions that it had probably was the fact that, like, it pretty much, if you think about it this way, Dragon Warrior 1 was the seed that spawned all these other games, and the fact that, like, you can have, like, this big world, and granted, your character doesn't have a lot of story or whatever, or backstory or anything, you could still have a lot of fun in it, because you can pretty much make it you and play as it. And I think as a series, they've done a really good job of keeping it up to a certain point where you're the silent protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
So you feel like you're playing, you are part of the game, rather than you're just playing this one character and you're doing things. But I like how it's just every Dragon Warrior game that you've ever played is a very colorful game, and like it's very like visually satisfying to like play the game and see like all the cool things, and like just think about like all the worlds that they, or at least exploring the entire world. Like I remember the first time I ever played Dragon Warrior 8, and I was just outside of town and I just spun the camera around and I'm like, "Oh my god, this thing is amazingly big." I think that Dragon Warrior was able to kind of show you how vast they can make like a video game world, and like all these different areas to explore, and you just want to check them all out. And I think that it does a really good job of doing that, and they've definitely continued that aspect throughout the series, along with a really good battle system. They pretty much streamlined it now, where it's much more fast.
Sure.
And it's just a lot more fun to see the battle. It's just really awesome just to see how the series has grown between, like, you can kind of like look at like the latest Dragon Warrior game, like Dragon Quest IX or whatever, and you can see like, oh, that one was from Dragon Warrior 1. I like the fact too that they also keep monsters. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They don't just make a whole set of monsters. They're like, here's, we still have slimes, we still have drakies, we still have dragons and all that stuff.
Yeah,
really cool.
Some of the original ones, like you mentioned, Golem, goes through the series, but then it gets adapted a little bit where you got different types of golems. Like I think there was like a gold golem,
and an iron golem or something like that.
Right,
stone one. I mean,
so
stone.
So even when they go and change a particular monster, it's still the same thing, except now I think what they call it in later games is like they're in the family of
exactly
monsters of that particular kind. Exactly. I like to look at this game and see a lot of the small things, the in music. The question for you before we wrap this up: how does? Because this was your first actual Let's Play.
Yes, it was.
But you had played all the previous Dragon Warriors as well. How weird? Yes. How weird was it, if at all, that all of a sudden you went from all of those to go to this one where there's only you? Because now it's always at least 2 or 3 people with you.
Yeah.
Actually, is this the only one where it's just you the entire game? Now that I'm thinking about it.
I think so.
Other than the Wii one. Oh no, the Wii one did have party members as well.
Yeah, the Wii one you had one extra person with you. I think this is the only one that you play as one person for the whole game. Like Dragon Warrior 2, you play as one person for a little while. And even Dragon Warrior 3, I guess, if you didn't want to get party members,
theoretically,
you could do it yourself. Yeah. It'd be a solo run, but
that's your choice. That's a difference. There's a difference though. That's that person's choice if they want to do a solo run. There's no option. You don't have the option to recruit party members.
Exactly. You are correct.
So I'm in, like, that interests me too, because do you think that decision was based on maybe system capabilities? Maybe they were like, oh no, we don't know, we don't have the knowledge of how to do more than one person parties, or do you just think that was a creative choice?
I think, to be honest, I think it was a creative choice, because if you look at again, another parallel to pretty much Final Fantasy came out a little bit after Dragon Warrior, and they had 4 party members, but those guys were a little like, for some reason, I never felt like I was any of those 4 people, even if I made my name those people. But for some reason, if you play the game and you're just one person, similar to like almost a first-person shooter in some aspects.
Sure.
Like if you're just playing as the one person, you can feel like you're more in that, you are more that character, or you're in that game more if you're the one person taking on the whole world, rather than you and then 3 other people you don't really know too well, or that you create as well, taking on the whole world. I think that it might have been a creative choice, because I'm sure they could have done like added extra people, but I think that they wanted to be like, listen, you're going to be the lone hero, and this is going to be a good way. And then like in the second game, they're like, oh, we could add more people and like take the main character from the first game and kind of break him up into 3 parts and have 3 people be that one guy. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like different aspects, like magic user and fighter and all that. But I think it might have been a creative choice, because I feel like it's just something where it's like it gives the player an opportunity to feel like they're actually that character and they're exploring the world and everything. And that's really something really big that I'm sure they were trying to do a little bit, especially being one of the first role-playing games to be on like a video game console. You kind of want to try and get the player or the person who's playing the game to feel like they're like really in the world.
Right. You know, and just to conclude this episode, and I'm gonna give you some time to hype up, your YouTube page and whatnot. But to me, the legacies of Dragon Warriors, the fact that it's still going on today, like, yes, for a number of years it wasn't popular in North America. We weren't getting certain games that Japan was getting, and even from what I can tell, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, even the ones that we were getting, we're getting on delay. Like Japan had it months, maybe even years before us. Like I'm talking about maybe like 7, 8. I don't know if there was any. I would think that there was probably some difference, because again, this is a series that's been primarily popular in Japan.
Yeah.
But if there's any proof to me, if there's any proof on how popular this series is in Japan and that I'm not just blowing smoke up this game's ass. Just look at Fortune Street. Mario, no one's going to argue Mario's popularity. Do you think they just put Dragon Quest characters on there just for the hell of that?
No.
No, they would not do that. Nintendo would not do that. They did it because in Japan, they probably lost their mind because there's like all these Dragon Quest characters. And maybe, unfortunately, in North America, people I know like the game. I like it as well. But probably didn't know some of the characters on there because it's, again, but the fact of the matter is this. At the end of the day, it started, what year did you say, Pete?
It was 86.
And here we are in 2016, and as Pete mentioned earlier, there's supposed to be new games coming out. So it's a series that's still going, much like the Final Fantasy series. So it obviously had longevity. And I think ultimately that's me looking at Dragon Warrior 1, and that's its legacy. It had longevity and has a distinct feel of a roleplay, of an RPG. All right, Pete, let's get final plugs, and then we're heading out of here.
All right. So you can check out my Let's Plays and various video game walkthroughs on YouTube at Kenshin1913. That'd be YouTube, and then just put in Kenshin1913, and you'll find my channel. I pretty much do a lot of role-playing games and all that stuff, and of course I have pretty much all the Dragon Warriors on there. And then I got Twitter and Facebook. You just look it up, Kenshin1913.
Great. Thank you very much, Pete, for your time today. And thank you, everyone, and I'll catch you next week.